You know, the history of the UK Prime Minister is a funny one. For example, the OG limey leader Sir Robert Walpole served as PM for over 20 years and was highly respected throughout his time in office during the early 1700s, despite being only 25 when he was first elected and also being an inbred from Norfolk. Then all the rest of them were pretty boring till we randomly got a double chin racialist in a top hat who nicked his name from a pooch off some insurance ad, who then took us to war to fight some scrawny soy boy with Dirty Sanchez on his lip who wanted to abolish all the world's juice. What this National Socialist fella had against Ribena and Sunny Delight, I don't know. But anyway, this technically unelected Churchill chap was known for his quick wit and spine of steel, and for stirring speeches about how we'll never surrender and that we'll fight them on all sorts of fronts and in all kinds of geographical locations, which is just what the young lads already bloody exhausted from the First World War really wanted to hear. What? Oh hell no! Then in the 70s and 80s, a puppet from a satirical TV show called Spitting Image bizarrely came to life, and this Margaret Thatcher broad became Britain's first female leader, and proceeded to take up the reins of being an hard bastard by telling the coal miners to get back to work and randomly proposing to tax Polish people. Or something like that. Fast forward a few years and you get to one of the most horrific creatures to ever walk the face of the earth. And no, I'm not talking about Mr. Blobby. I mean Anthony Charles Linton Blair. This slimy warmongering toady boy who was secretly sucking off his Yankee boy counterpart George W. Bush. Bruh. Took the UK into an illegal war and opened up all its borders, which admittedly I kinda liked, because it meant I didn't have to queue up at the airport for so long and could walk straight through duty free, without some jobsworth asking me what my business was going to be in Mykonos for the next 2 weeks. Spoilers! It usually included being rejected by a dozen drunk birds wearing nothing but glittery pink leotards and then getting twatted on blue wickets every night. But anyway, Blair's policies of free movement and wars were all part of the same progressive agenda. And making British soldiers go shoot a bunch of brownies in a country what wasn't even involved in the American terrorist attacks, just so we can get a cheaper Toblerone on the way home from our holidays, was totally worth all the lost limbs to IEDs and war crimes committed based on a dodgy dossier of blatantly false claims of weapons of mass destruction. To say anything else is just far-right propaganda. So you shut up, bigots. Ahem. Then we got a carousel of increasingly less impressive losers holding office, including a Celtic gurning turnip called Gordon Brown, who was also unelected and proceeded to sell off all our gold for pittance. Bruh. Then we had top David Cameron, who made us do a Brexit and porked a pig. And finally, some budget Thatcher wannabe called Theresa May, a woman who looked like she was always in the highest mode of concentration necessary to retain human shape, and whose naughtiest sin in life was running through a farmer's field of wheat. Not a joke.
What's the naughtiest thing you ever did?
I have to confess, when me and my friends sort of used to run through the fields of wheat, the farmers weren't too pleased about that.
Which brings us to our current sorry state, where we've somehow gone from a highly respected Norfolk chap who served his country proudly for 20 years, to a bumbling clown entity what constantly gets caught on zip wires and indulges in a casual bout of racialisms. Walpole would be totally ashamed at the way politics has degenerated in the UK today, and that's coming from a guy who somehow had a less silly a wig than the current mop-head who can't stop wanking into women. I mean seriously, how does this pot-bedded comb dodger keep getting to shoot Bo Juniors up any skirt what fucking moves? I have to lure women into my bed with humour, candy, and Paul Hollywood paper face masks. Liberties! Anyway, this outgoing Prime Minister is called Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson. Again, not a joke. And he's just been fired by his own MPs for having wild parties and eating cake, when he should have been locked away in a tiny one-bed flat with no windows like the rest of us, despite winning an 80-seat majority barely 2 years ago, and thus squandering the biggest political opportunity since Labour leader Ed Miliband unironically unveiled his own headstone 5 days before the 2015 election.
But am I tough enough? Tough enough? Hell yes, I'm tough enough.
But how on earth did this happen? How did a bloke what won an unprecedented amount of votes from generational Labour supporters and from towns who have never voted Tory before in their whole 100-year history suddenly get ousted halfway through his first term, despite delivering on his election promise of getting his oven-ready Brexit deal done? and then fascistically locking down his own country, thereby destroying the ability for the working man to earn a living, inevitably leading to record inflation as his chancellor began just printing money to keep people quiet and indoors, all whilst going against every single instinct of his supposed libertarian values and betraying every principle of a conservative party that he's supposed to be leader of. I just can't understand why everyone lost confidence in his government. Honestly, it's just so baffling. Well, apparently, it all started to go wrong for the budget Michael Fabricant wannabe when he was suddenly taken into intensive care during the first few weeks of the COVID outbreak. And in this video, I'ma pull back the plastic curtains and reveal the super shocking secret meetings what took place behind the scenes. So let's get down to the nitty gritty.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
So in late March of the year of our Lord 2020, the UK Prime Minister took over our TV screens V for Vendetta style and told us we've got to lock ourselves in our homes and wait to get paid by the government for doing fuck all for a bit. And as you can imagine, they didn't have to tell most people twice. Having a lie-in and playing FIFA all day whilst the Chancellor pays your bills by printing money for you from thin air sounds like a right bargain, and a socialist wet friggin' dream. I mean, who cares if that inflation thing is inevitably going to come back and bite you on the arse in a few years? That's a problem for 2022, and that was miles away at that point. Anyway, this floppy crown flag shagger told us we'd have to lock down the country for 2 weeks to flatten the curve, whilst meanwhile ultra player health sec Matt Hancock was secretly flattening the curves of his friggin' mistress. And all this because of some virus. What totally didn't leak from a lab and decimated all the world's economies except the one country where it seemed to originate from. How lucky for the Chinese communists. So, like good little sheep, we all did what we were told. And that's when PM Bojo ended up getting the old kung flu. And during the second week of lockdown was taken into intensive care for a period of 3 days. And by intensive care, I mean a specialist hospital ward. And not just a private retreat where his girly friend Carrie Simmons got to massage his Johnson Jr. all day. But after my super secret investigative investigation, which totally wasn't just writing down all the nutty conspiracy theories off 4chan for a few years, I can now exclusively reveal that this whole narrative was in fact a cover story what was fed to the media in order to distract from the country's PM being MIA for a few days.
What?
Yes! This whole pantomime charade was in fact a cockamamie scheme, designed to distract the public so that Boris could be whisked off to a super secret underground base called Davos, which also just happens to be located in Davos, Switzerland, all whilst simultaneously upping the fear and panic levels about this novel new virus to the public to condition compliance. Talk about killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Anyway, turns out the people behind the kidnapping of the Bojo bloke was an organisation called the World Economic Forum, or the WEF for short, which is run by some Germanic bald nutter who styled himself on a Mike Myers character from the Austin Powers movies. And no, I don't mean fat bastard. Piers Morgan's already got that role covered. Apparently his name is Klaus Schwab, and this geezer unironically wants to do a world reset, and keeps talking about how great it's going to be when in 2030 we're all going to own nothing, eat a load of bugs and be happy about it all. Well, personally, I'm way ahead of this crusty kraut, as I've been vegan for the past 10 years. So I know all about having to endure eating fake food that's dressed up to look like real meat and pretending to love my life choices. So I for one am well prepped and ready for this great resetty thing. Now some people think this baldy bugger is trying to take over the world and implement something called global communism. But I've been reliably told by all my pals, including my far left college professor over in Portland, that real communism has never even been tried. So good on this Schwabby guy for having the balls to try something new. I'm not sure why some people take against this fella. I mean, let's be fair, he looks totally normal and gives off zero fascistic or crackpot authoritarian neo-feudalistic vibes at all. Not even when he bangs on about depopulation and brags about, quote, penetrating cabinets of world governments with his young global leaders.
What we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are for our actually young global leaders of the world.
But don't make the mistake of taking his words out of context and ignorantly thinking he means exactly what he says. Of course my boy Klaus is all above board. I mean, so what if this guy totally wrote and published a book about COVID and the Great Reset agenda all within 7 months of the virus first appearing? There ain't nothing weird or suspicious about that. And of course it weren't all planned ahead of time, even though the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did a tabletop exercise running exactly this kind of scenario in October 2019, a few weeks before the virus first appeared. You're just a conspiracy theorist. Bigot. But anyway, back to the main story. So Globo Homo Bojo was taken away in the dead of night and flown over to Davos on a private WEF jet, whilst handcuffed with a giant paper bag over his head. Luckily, this horny bastard was well used to being tied up with a bag over his head, as he always used to join Carrie's late night BDSM sessions on a Wednesday evening after a hard day listening to Keir Starmer's beige nonsense at PMQs. But it was only when he was slung in the middle of a cold underground bunker that he started to realise something was wrong, and that he probably wasn't going to get his ball bag tickled during this private session after all. Apparently, this defeffel geezer wasn't totally on board with this CCP-inspired lockdown policy, what all the Western governments have seemingly all agreed to implement in total accidental lockstep. So Klausy Boy and his Weffy goons had no choice but to rough him up a bit. But unfortunately, all this physical pounding started giving him a raging lob on, and so the thugs went off to wash the blood off their hands for 20 seconds while singing Happy Birthday, whilst Klaus stepped in to start threatening the lives of Johnson's children if he didn't start to play ball. This approach also failed, however, because Bojo had long since lost track of his own spawn, and had no clue if this Lara lettuce bird who Klaus was currently threatening to bump off was one of his own or not. So frankly, he struggled to give a toss. Mr. Schwab soon got fed up and went after the only thing he knew was a surefire way to gain compliance from his ex-young Global Leader Programme graduate, and warned how if he didn't immediately lock down the country and tell everyone to stand 6 feet apart whilst wearing a gimp mask because reasons, he'd tell his handler Carrie to dump his fat ass and then get a court order to make him pay a shit ton of child support, thereby draining what limited resources he had left to pay for his other 45 sprogs. Now sweating like a Nazi prince who just got exposed hanging out a bit too close with Jeffrey Epstein, Boris soon agreed to Schwabby's terms, as he had to keep his severely limited and fast depleting finances in good check, and he just couldn't face having to go and do another Have I Got News For You guest host appearance just to raise some quick cash, especially having to sit opposite that Ian Hislop twonk, who resembled an adult mutant baby with a perpetually smug face, what looks like it got stuck in the wind after he let out a silent but violent fart as he passed a desperate begging tramp in Highgate. Anyway, Boris was soon slipped back to St Thomas's Hospital under the cover of darkness, and was rewarded with a giant fuck-off Toblerone from Daddy Klaus as they flew back from Switzerland. And K Schwab was well pleased with his reactivated mop-head stoogey puppet gimp. And to ensure defeffel kept to his master's plan, he sent his state-of-the-art deluxe android goon to watch over him, fresh off the same lab what makes the Zuckerberg bots. And to make it seem reasonable to have a robot thug at his side to keep him in line at all times, they gave the robo-mofo the role of the UK's Chief Medical Officer for Public Health. And from that moment on, Professor Chris Witty had free rein to dodge any difficult questions and spout any old shite on the BBC News, no matter how hypocritical his policy advice or how blatantly nonsensical his presentations. And the rest, as they say, is history. Over the course of the next few months, Boris doubled down on the New World Order agenda, and dutifully extended the 2 weeks to slow the spread deal with the public to 17 months to lose your job, home and mental health, and thereby giving the crazy conspiracist loons all sorts of I told you so moments by confirming all of their Facebook and 4chan posts, indeed telling everyone so. But anyway, that's the story as to what happened to the once notoriously libertarian UK Prime Minister once he got sick and ended up in quote intensive care. Although he's now been ousted because he opened up the UK way too early, apparently misreading secret comms from the WEF what he thought instructed him to quote release the citizens. But in fact the harmless memo had just got cut off at the end and Klaus had just said release the city and then, in reference to the City of London potentially being put up for rent, and now the German penis head has to go through all the intimidation malarkey again by arranging more Weffy stooges to manoeuvre themselves into power positions in order to ensure his associates are in place for the next leadership contest. Which looks to have been successful after the top 3 contenders to progress to the last stages of the Tory leadership race were all WEF-backed candidates. Which is all totally normal and defo not something that's in dire need of any kind of journalistic interrogation by the supposedly credible and objective non-partisan news outlets of the mainstream media in any way. Oh well, from heroes to zeros, the UK certainly had some colourful premieres in its time. And by colourful, I don't mean alleged nonce Ted Heath, the unmarried and supposed virgin fella who racked up 42 allegations of underage sexual exploitation, including satanic ritual abuse of children, which was swiftly swept under the carpet even though he was operating in the same circles and at the same time as Jimmy Savile and that glitter fella. But maybe the next PM can restore some fun and sanity to the country, what gave us colonialism, mucky teeth and Jeremy Kyle. Oh, it's still early days, but let's see what Prime Minister-S Liz Truss can do. After all, if this alt-universe Chucky doll can deliver a stirring speech about the folly of importing cheese...
We import 2/3 of our cheese. That is a disgrace.
Maybe she'll have the strength to tell Captain Schwabby Pants to stick his WEFy agenda where the sun don't shine. Hashtag trust the Truss. Although apparently her first name is really Mary, so turns out she's already lying to the public by making us all call her Liz. But still, hashtag trust the Truss, bigots. Now if you like it, you press the like it. Wanna subscribe it, you press subscribe it. It's cookie simple, lad.